мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Ее цель – защита людей, которые на протяжении 8 лет подвергаются издевательствам, геноциду со стороны киевского режима. И для этого мы будем стремиться к демилитаризации и денацификации Украины, а также преданию суду тех, кто совершил многочисленные кровавые преступления против мирных жителей, в том числе и граждан Российской Федерации.
Даже 2 метра давай, привяжи.
Пойти и назначить.
Я понял, приведешь сюда его?
Так сюда и приведу, пусть, блядь, принимает администрацию, начинает руководство.
So if you were to predict when this peace process might come to reach its goal of ending the conflict, well, I guess the question is how long is a piece of string? I think the history of negotiations that take place during hostilities, there's quite a lot of examples in recent and ancient history. It just shows that these things are quite meandering. And it could be any length of time. But if you were to predict, you would say that there are at least 2.5 more years, nearly 3 years of Donald Trump in the White House. That means Vladimir Putin has got a sympathetic ear in the White House, because Trump has always been quite open to listening to the Russian perspective for that duration of time. And one would then sensibly conclude that if Putin wants an off-ramp, he can probably take it in the next couple of years at any stage. Because Trump, of course, says he has a commitment to ending the bloodshed, also wants his credentials for his Nobel Peace Prize. He's been very vocal about that claim. And ending Russia's invasion of Ukraine would be the centerpiece of his claim for a European granted prize, having ended this biggest war in Europe since World War II.
So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them.
Но при этом мы убеждены, что чтобы украинская урегулированная сила устойчивый и долгосрочный характер, должны быть устранены все первопричины кризиса, о которых говорили неоднократно. Обеспечен учет всех законных озабоченностей России, восстановлен справедливый баланс в сфере безопасности в Европе и в мире в целом. Я согласен с президентом Трампом, он сегодня говорил об этом, что, безусловно, должна быть обеспечена и безопасность Украины. Конечно, мы готовы над этим работать. Хочется надеяться, что достигнутое нами понимание позволит приблизиться к той цели и откроет дорогу к миру на Украине.
We could be very close. There are one or two very thorny issues, very tough issues, but I think we're doing very well. We made a lot of progress today, but really we've made it over the last month. This is not a one-day process deal. This is very complicated stuff.
And we discussed all the aspects of the peace framework, which includes, and we have great achievements, 20-point peace plan, 90% agreed, and U.S.-Ukraine security guarantees, 100% agreed. U.S.-Europe-Ukraine security guarantees, almost agreed. Military dimension, 100% agreed.
In terms of the distance between the negotiating positions of the two sides, the Americans, if you were to believe them at face value in terms of what they're putting out as commentary, is that the gap is narrowing. It's narrowing to a few difficult to resolve issues, some of which we can well assume would relate to the territorial status of the Donbass region. But I think the reality is that if you were to ask the two sides, the answer might be very different. And in particular, Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, has put out a number of tweets that have indicated that there is still a lot of daylight between the two sides, between his negotiating team and the Russian negotiating team.
Переговоры шли 2 дня, очень долго вчера, в разных форматах, и вот еще сегодня, около 2 часов. Они были тяжелыми, но деловыми. В ближайшее время состоится следующая встреча. Это все, что мы хотели сказать.
Україна зацікавлена в результаті. Станом на сьогодні не можемо сказати, що результат достатній. Військові поспілкувались з частини питань серйозно та змістовно. Чутливі політичні питання, питання про можливі компроміси та необхідну зустріч лідерів ще не опрацьовані достатньо.
Да, баллистика.
And really, that's the gap. The Russians want the Ukrainians to voluntarily cede those territories in Donetsk in particular. The Ukrainians, quite understandably, have fought tooth and nail for 11 years now to defend those territories, but also fear that voluntarily giving them up would open the path potentially to a Russian invasion of further Ukrainian territories further west. And that is one of the biggest sticking points, is the future fate of the Donbass territories that the Ukrainians still control. And it's extremely difficult to imagine finding a formula that would allow the Ukrainians and the Russians to walk away from these talks, both saying that they've won to their own domestic populations. One of the biggest mistakes in assessing the European role is just to say, well, they've been sidelined because Trump is this big beast of a president who rules the roost. But actually what's happened is the Europeans have emerged as the principal guarantors of sort of longevity of support to Ukraine. And by that, the people like Keir Starmer, Merz and Macron have stood shoulder to shoulder with Zelensky, promising their contribution to security guarantees, but also making sure, almost advocating for, their clients in court, if you like to use that analogy, in the eyes of the American administration, that Ukraine's needs can't be just ignored. And I think that's a really important point. The Europeans are quite directly representing Zelensky and Ukraine's need to have security guarantees and amplifying that need. So that otherwise, if it was just Zelensky's voice, I don't think would be heard in the White House.
War would have never happened. We would have had a deal negotiated for you without having to go through.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Щодо розгортання багатонаціональних сил на підтримку оборони, відбудови та стратегічної стійкості.
Declaration of intent between the French Republic, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and Ukraine with Northern Ireland. Sir Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Signatory for the French Republic, Mr. Emmanuel Macron, President of the French Republic, signatory for Ukraine, Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine.
Done.